My stepdaughter rolled her eyes and said, "You're just the guy who pays the bills, not my real dad." I didn't react, just nodded. And when her college acceptance letter came, I handed it back and said, "Then have your real dad handle the fees." Her smirk disappeared fast, and so did her future plans. I, 42M, never thought 7 words could change everything. But when my stepdaughter looked me dead in the eye and told me I was just the guy who pays the bills, not her real dad, something inside me shifted. I didn't yell, didn't argue, just nodded and walked away. Little did she know, those words would cost her everything she'd worked toward. Let me back up. I married my wife Sarah when her daughter Emma was 12. Emma's biological father had been out of the picture since she was 5, sending maybe 3 birthday cards in 7 years and 0 child support. I stepped in willingly, knowing what I was signing up for. Or so I thought. The first few years were rocky, but manageable. Emma tested boundaries, which was normal for a kid dealing with a new family dynamic. I paid for her braces, her dance classes, her school trips. When she wanted to join the expensive traveling soccer team, I wrote the check without hesitation. Sarah would thank me later, saying how grateful she was that Emma had a stable father figure. By the time Emma hit 16, I genuinely believed we'd found our rhythm. She'd started calling me by my first name instead of avoiding addressing me entirely, which felt like progress. I helped her with homework, drove her to friends' houses, attended every parent-teacher conference. When she got her license, I spent weekends teaching her parallel parking in empty lots. The college planning started junior year. Emma had her heart set on a prestigious private university across the country. The tuition alone was $60,000 a year, not counting room, board, and expenses. We're talking about a $250,000 education. Sarah and I had been saving, but that kind of money doesn't grow on trees. I worked extra hours, took on weekend consulting projects, and even sold my classic car that I'd been restoring for 15 years. Every sacrifice felt worth it when I saw Emma's face light up talking about her future major, the campus she'd visited, the internships she could land with that degree. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday in March. Emma screamed when she opened it, hugging Sarah and jumping around the kitchen. I stood there grinning, already mentally calculating how we'd manage the first semester payment. Emma thanked her mom profusely for supporting her dreams, for believing in her, for making this possible. I waited for my acknowledgement. It never came. That evening, I brought up the financial planning we needed to do. I'd researched payment plans, student loan options, and scholarship opportunities we might have missed. Emma listened with half an ear while scrolling through her phone, occasionally rolling her eyes when I mentioned budget considerations. Sarah suggested we celebrate at Emma's favorite restaurant. Over dinner, Emma talked nonstop about dorm life, sororities, and the friends she'd make. When the check came, she looked right at me and made a joke about how at least I was good for picking up dinner tabs. The comment stung, but I let it slide. Kids say thoughtless things. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. Emma had been increasingly dismissive, treating me like hired help rather than family. When I asked her to clean her room before her graduation party, she brushed me off. When I mentioned she needed to thank her grandparents for their graduation gift, she told me to handle it myself. The final straw was over something stupid. She'd left her car running in the driveway for 40 minutes while she got ready, wasting gas and running up our electric bill with the garage door open. When I asked her to be more mindful, she exploded. She told me I was controlling, that I wasn't her boss, and that I needed to back off. When I calmly explained that I was just trying to teach responsibility, she delivered the line that changed everything. I was just the guy who pays the bills, not her real dad, and I needed to remember my place. Sarah wasn't home to hear it. Emma said it with such cold certainty that I knew she'd been thinking it for a long time. This wasn't teenage anger talking. This was how she really saw me. I stood there for a moment, processing. Then I nodded and told her she was absolutely right. I wasn't her real dad. I was just the guy who pays the bills. Her smirk told me she thought she'd won. The next morning, I called the university's financial aid office. I explained that there had been a change in Emma's funding situation and requested information about their payment deadline and refund policies. I learned I had until May 1st to submit the enrollment deposit, and tuition payments weren't due until July. I didn't say anything to Emma or Sarah about my call. Emma spent the next few weeks planning her dorm room setup and shopping for college essentials. Sarah helped her research professors and course schedules. I watched quietly as they made lists and Pinterest boards and Amazon wish lists. 2 weeks before the enrollment deadline, Sarah approached me about setting up the payment plan. She'd printed out all the forms and highlighted where I needed to sign. She thanked me again for making Emma's dreams possible and mentioned how proud she was of the young woman Emma had become. I told Sarah we needed to talk. That evening, after Emma left for a friend's house, I sat Sarah down and explained what had happened. I told her about Emma's comment and how it made me realize something important. If I was just the guy who pays the bills, then I needed to act like it. Sarah initially tried to dismiss it as teenage attitude, insisting Emma didn't mean it. When I pressed her about Emma's consistent behavior over the past year, Sarah admitted she'd noticed the disrespect but had hoped it would pass. I explained my decision calmly. Emma's real father was still alive and presumably capable of supporting his daughter's education. Since I wasn't her real dad, it wasn't my responsibility to fund her future. If she wanted to go to that expensive university, she could ask her real father or find another way. Sarah was shocked. She argued that Emma was just being a teenager, that I was overreacting, that this would destroy Emma's future over a moment of anger. I reminded her that Emma had been treating me this way for months, and that this wasn't about punishment, but about boundaries. Sarah asked what I expected Emma to do now, with just 2 weeks before the deadline. I suggested she could call her biological father, apply for student loans, consider community college for 2 years, or find a less expensive in-state option. Plenty of kids manage to get educated without someone else footing a $250,000 bill. The conversation ended with Sarah in tears and me sleeping in the guest room. Emma came home the next day to find Sarah crying at the kitchen table. When Emma asked what was wrong, Sarah explained the situation. Emma's initial reaction was disbelief, followed by rage. Emma stormed into my office where I was working and demanded to know if I was really going to destroy her life over one comment. I looked up from my computer and reminded her that she'd been very clear about our relationship. I was just the guy who pays the bills, not her real dad. Since she had a real dad, she should ask him for help. The color drained from her face as she realized I was serious. She tried to backtrack, saying she didn't mean it, that she was just angry, that she considered me family. I listened quietly and then asked her why she'd never thanked me for any of the sacrifices I'd made for her education fund. She couldn't answer. I told her I'd spent the last week thinking about our relationship. I couldn't remember the last time she'd hugged me, thanked me, or treated me with basic respect. I'd been pouring money and effort into someone who saw me as a wallet with legs. That needed to change. Emma tried arguing, then pleading, then threatening. She said she'd never forgive me, that I was destroying her dreams out of spite, that her mom would divorce me over this. I remained calm and told her that her real father had 10 days to figure out funding, or she could explore other options. She ran to her room sobbing. Sarah barely spoke to me for the next week. She tried everything from guilt trips to ultimatums. She accused me of being petty, vindictive, and heartless. She threatened to leave me and take Emma somewhere I couldn't hurt her anymore. I asked Sarah where she planned to go, exactly, and how she planned to support herself and Emma without my income. The question hung in the air between us. Emma spent the week frantically trying to reach her biological father. She finally got through to him after 3 days of calling. I don't know exactly what was said, but Emma emerged from her room in tears. Apparently, her real dad was sorry but couldn't help with college expenses. He had a new family now and his own financial obligations. With 5 days left, Emma began exploring other options. She called the state university but had missed their financial aid deadline. Community college was still possible, but she'd have to reapply for the following year to transfer. Student loans would cover some costs, but not nearly enough for her dream school without a cosigner. She asked Sarah to cosign. Sarah's credit wasn't good enough to qualify for the amount needed. 3 days before the deadline, Emma knocked on my office door. She asked if we could talk. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She apologized for what she'd said and how she'd been treating me. She admitted she'd taken me for granted and hadn't shown proper appreciation for everything I'd done. She asked if there was any way I'd reconsider helping with college. I asked her what had changed. She said she realized how much I'd sacrificed for her and that she truly was sorry. I asked her if she would have had this realization if her real father had been able to pay for college instead. She couldn't answer that either. I explained that her apology seemed motivated by desperation rather than genuine remorse. If she truly understood the value of what I'd provided, she wouldn't have dismissed me so cruelly in the first place. Real change in attitude couldn't happen overnight just because she needed something. Emma cried and begged. She promised to do better, to treat me with respect, to appreciate what I did for the family. I told her I believed she was sincere in that moment. But that sincerity born from necessity wasn't the same as sincerity born from genuine feeling. She left my office devastated. The enrollment deadline came and went. Emma's spot at her dream university was given to someone else. Update 1. The aftermath was brutal. Emma fell into a depression that lasted most of the summer. She barely left her room, refused to discuss alternative college plans, and alternated between blaming me for ruining her life and blaming herself for throwing away her opportunities. Sarah eventually stopped the silent treatment, but our relationship was permanently altered. She understood my perspective intellectually, but couldn't forgive what she saw as a disproportionate response that hurt Emma more than it taught her anything. I suggested family counseling. Emma refused to participate. Sarah and I went alone for several sessions. The therapist helped us communicate better, but couldn't resolve the fundamental disagreement about whether my actions were justified. Emma eventually enrolled in community college for the spring semester. She lived at home, worked part-time at a coffee shop, and began the process of earning credits she could transfer. The dynamic between us was formal and distant. She was polite but cold, treating me like a landlord rather than family. Sarah and I stayed together, but the easy warmth in our marriage was gone. She handled most interactions with Emma, creating an uncomfortable buffer zone in our own home. Update 2. 2 years later, Emma transferred to the state university. She'd maintained excellent grades at community college and qualified for merit-based aid that made the tuition manageable. She was 2 years behind her original timeline, but moving forward. The interesting change was in how she talked about her experience. She began mentioning how the community college years had taught her responsibility, how working while going to school gave her perspective on money, and how she'd learned not to take educational opportunities for granted. She still didn't thank me directly, but I overheard her telling a friend that maybe taking the longer path hadn't been entirely bad for her. Our relationship remained cordial but distant. She was respectful now, but it felt performative rather than genuine. She thanked me when I helped with something, asked permission before using my things, and contributed to household chores without being asked. Sarah began to soften toward me again as she saw Emma maturing. She admitted that while my methods had been harsh, Emma had developed a work ethic and appreciation for education that she might not have learned otherwise. Update 3. Emma graduated from State University last month with a degree in business administration. She'd earned it entirely through her own efforts, with help from student loans, scholarships, and work-study programs. The total debt was manageable, and she had a job lined up with a local company. At her graduation party, something unexpected happened. Emma pulled me aside and told me she wanted to talk privately. We went out to the backyard while the celebration continued inside. She said she'd spent 4 years thinking about what had happened between us. She admitted that at 18, she'd been selfish, entitled, and cruel. She said she understood now what I'd been trying to teach her, even if the lesson had been painful. She thanked me for everything I'd done for her over the years, acknowledging sacrifices she'd been too immature to recognize at the time. She said she was grateful that I'd forced her to grow up, even though she'd hated me for it. Then she asked if there was any way we could start over and build a real relationship, not based on money or obligation, but on mutual respect and choice. I told her I'd been hoping for that conversation for 4 years. We hugged for the first time since she was 16. Final update. It's been 6 months since graduation. Emma and I have coffee every few weeks. She asks for my advice on career decisions and life choices. She includes me in family discussions naturally rather than grudgingly. She's never called me dad, and I don't expect her to. But she treats me like family now, and that's enough. Sarah and I went to couples counseling again last year to work through the lingering resentment from that difficult period. We're in a good place now. She admits that while she didn't agree with my approach, she can see that Emma emerged from the experience as a stronger, more mature person. Looking back, I don't know if I would handle it the same way again. The nuclear option created years of pain for everyone involved. But I also can't pretend that Emma would have learned these lessons any other way. She was on a path to becoming an entitled adult who took her advantages for granted. Sometimes people need to lose something to understand its value. Emma lost her dream college experience, but gained something more important: The knowledge that respect and gratitude aren't optional in relationships, even family ones. She'll never again tell someone who loves her that they're just the person who pays the bills. And for me, that makes everything we went through worth it.